Well, welcome back to North Star Oasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. We're broadcasting live from the Suburban Community Channel's studios in White Bear Lake, Minnesota. Today is the 27th of December, 2014. This is our final broadcast of this calendar year. So, Happy New Year, everybody. We have 363 shopping days left until Christmas. And speaking of Christmas, this year was a brown Christmas. There was very, very limited amounts of snow, hardly anywhere. But when I woke up this morning and I saw an avalanche on the roof of my roof and the hood of my car, I got a sneaking suspicion that we're going to have a white New Year's, since that's only a week away. So I'm going to kind of change the topic a little bit on the weather today, because we're actually going to go on our first segment over to a sunny day that occurred. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman named Fanny. This actually happened in July 9th of 1861 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Fanny, she was in her house. She had her two daughters with. Now, if you think back to 1861 and the clothing that women wore, I mean, a lot of hoops in their skirts, and even if she wasn't wearing a hoop skirt, just the clothing that women wore in that particular era, was very loose hanging. A lot of dresses, even work attire was all dresses. I'm talking about housework. And Fanny spent on this particular day, I think she was doing a sewing project with one of her two daughters. And it was a hot and stuffy July summer day. I know it's the kind of weather that we in Minnesota would all dream about right now. And she opened up the, hold on, to my young producer, Andrew, I saw that. No yawning is allowed in this studio during this show. I hope I haven't bored you yet. But anyhow, Fanny wanted to get some air, located, not too far from the water, and she opens up the window, and this breeze came in, and she'd already lit a candle, to see, because it was starting to get a little dark. And something happened, and there was a match that had lit the bottom of her dress on fire. And I know you're wondering, where am I going with this? And there's Andrew yawning again. So her dress gets lit on fire, and she's trying to get the flames out, and this is consuming her. Her husband comes in and wraps her around in a rug. That doesn't quell the flames. He smothers the flames with his own body. And that wasn't good enough. On July 10th, 1861, she passed away. Her husband also was not able to make the funeral because he was badly burned. And so he spent the next few days and weeks essentially in bed in that house. And he was recuperating from his injuries. And let's pull up a photo. And this is actually a famous photo. And we'll pull up the photo right now. This is Fanny's husband. I'm talking about Fanny Elizabeth Appleton. She was the daughter of Nathan Appleton, who was the brother of Samuel Appleton, so she was Samuel Appleton's niece. Samuel Appleton is the person that Appleton, Wisconsin was named after. And Samuel Appleton was also the person who was very closely aligned with Amos Lawrence, who was the founder of Lawrence, Kansas, and really big in the Immigrant Aid Society, which wanted to populate the state of Kansas with abolitionists. The reason why this is important is because this person is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. This happened at the Craigie House, and the Craigie House was a gift from Nathan Appleton to his daughter Fanny and her new husband in 1844, which was Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And Longfellow, at that point in time in his life, he didn't wear a beard. He did this to cover up the scars that were on his face from that fateful day when his beloved wife had passed away. He spent the next couple of years translating Dante's Inferno from Italian into English. And if you've ever read Dante's Inferno, it is one incredibly long poem. It's a very powerful one. A lot of authors from the 17, 1800s really got a lot of inspiration from it. And Longfellow, being a poet and an author himself, he devoted himself to that work largely as a way of trying to overcome the grief that he was suffering from that July 1861 incident. One thing he did keep up regularly was attending the Saturday Club meetings. Now, the Saturday Club was a group of influential literary folks. Some of the members included Louis Agassiz, Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., and later would include Ralph Waldo Emerson, and even Senator Charles Sumner, the great abolitionist U.S. Senator. Senator Sumner was the person that was caned by Congressman Preston Brooks in 1856 on the floor of the United States Senate. So Longfellow was involved with all of this, but he was really going through a period of really deep grief. And if anybody's had a tragic loss, whether it be a loss of a family member suddenly, whether it be a spouse, even divorce, separation, there's usually a long period of recovery that's associated with overcoming that trauma. And that's what Longfellow was going through at this time. One other thing I want to mention about the Saturday Club, even Charles Dickens was a pseudo member of the Saturday Club, and when he would make his trips from England over to the United States, a lot of his friends in England wanted him to go to New York, but Dickens said he felt more at home being in Boston. And it was in 1867 in Boston when he gave his first public United States reading of his famed book, A Christmas Carol. That happened at the Saturday Club, and I believe Longfellow was actually there. In March of 1863, so fast forwarding 2 years, Fanny and Henry's son, Charles Appleton Longfellow, he felt that he needed to do his part in the war effort. Again, this is an abolitionist family. And so he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry, Company G. Participated in the May 1863 battle at Chancellorsville, but typhoid fever had caused him to miss the Gettysburg campaign. However, he was back on duty, and on November 27th, 1863, at the Battle of New Hope Church, Lieutenant Charles Appleton Longfellow was wounded in action. He was shot through the left shoulder. The bullet had exited under the right shoulder blade, traveled across his back, and it skimmed his spine, but he avoided paralysis by less than an inch. So very, very harrowing time. So here you have a grieving Henry Wadsworth Longfellow still suffering from the loss of his wife, and now his son comes back from war very, very banged up. In 1863, by Christmas, Longfellow, who recorded a journal, which I've read, he was very silent. He didn't write anything on that day. His attitude at that point in time was that God was dead, God didn't care, God may not have even existed, that all that he had believed had come to naught. He was really suffering from a lot of pain and anguish. But then, by Christmas of 1864, something happened. He got over his melancholy. His son was recovering. His wife had passed away almost 2.5 years prior. And he woke up on Christmas morning. And when he woke up, he heard bells. He heard the church bells ringing out through the countryside. He heard the bells throughout Cambridge, Massachusetts. And then he sat down and he wrote a poem. And what he said was, God is not dead. God is very much alive, because I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Now that particular poem was later in 1872, music was added, and we're going to play that familiar carol for you right now that you know the story of I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day.
heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat, of peace on earth, goodwill to men. I thought, as now this day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rung so long the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men.
Peace on earth, goodwill to men.
And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men.
Goodwill to men. Then peal the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor does he sleep.
The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men.
Goodwill to men.
And there you have it. Peace on earth, goodwill to man. So, as we're at this Christmas season, still wrapping up as we are in the 12 days of Christmas, that it's important for us to end this year on a positive note, and also to begin the next year on that same positive note. That if you have anything that's holding you back from telling somebody how you care, if you've got anybody you haven't spoken to in a long time that you're mad at, now is the time to get over the grievances. As a matter of fact, the old Seinfeld TV show used to have Festivus, and that was the airing of grievances. Well, maybe the airing of grievances on the 23rd of December is not a bad thing, because then by the 24th and 25th, then whoever you've got your grievances aired at, then you can come to a reconciliation. And it's that reconciliation I'm going to move to now, because 50 years later, and by the way, the Christmas of 1864, that was 150 years ago. That's when Longfellow wrote his famous poem. But now we're going to fast forward to something that happened 50 years later than that, and we're going to use video to introduce this segment. And yes, you're watching World War I footage. The footage you're watching is actually German footage from the European front. I'm not exactly sure where all of this fighting took place. I don't know that information, but I'll tell you this, that by 1914 through 1917, the Germans were on the cutting edge of technology, and that's one thing that they heavily invested in. And so it would not surprise me that you actually have some of the first color footage actually coming out of Germany at this point in time. But video cameras had been around since at least 1893, when Thomas Edison had filmed some of his early motion pictures. And no, the audio did not come with the video when it was taken. That's the scene of combat from 100 years ago. Keep it up.
My name is Taylor Rippey Monson, and I represent Arbingers the Reconciliation Project. We're here in the south of Belgium commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the Great War. This holiday season, we're challenging people to declare truces in their own lives. We're inspired by the Christmas Truce of 1914, when enemy soldiers laid down their weapons and chose to see one another as people. The Reconciliation Project is hoping that people can learn more about this story and can hear accounts of different people that were present and be able to look at what took place 100 years ago. And as we approach this holiday season and we're looking into the new year, to be thinking of relationships in their own lives, areas that they could declare personal truces. If these people were able to do this in the middle of war, having been killing one another mere hours before, what is it that I can do personally to reach out to an estranged family member, or to reconnect with an old friend, or maybe to introduce myself to someone that I have yet to meet? A lot of us have people in our lives that we've been avoiding for whatever reason. Maybe this will be an opportunity for us to reflect personally and consider what truces can be declared in our own lives, inspired by the soldiers that chose to do this 100 years ago.
So now, what exactly did those soldiers do 100 years ago? Well, we're going to have some British World War. I got some footage here of some British World War I soldiers. This is some old video. I don't think there are any World War I soldiers left amongst any of the nations that participated, to my knowledge, since this would have been 100 years ago. These folks would have been about 117, 118 if they would have been at the earliest age of enlistment. So chances are now that all of the World War I veterans have passed away, but what they left behind was a legacy 100 years ago of being able to put aside their arms, to not shoot at each other for one day, and to actually look at each other as human beings and not just the enemy, the unseen enemy, the faceless enemy. You know, finally you saw some humanity coming out of war. Now, there were incidents like that throughout the history of warfare that had similar things. There's angels on the battlefield in the Civil War. There was Marie's Heights at Fredericksburg. There was a Confederate soldier who helped a Union soldier, or vice versa. You know, so stories like that are not uncommon. But what is uncommon is to actually have miles upon miles upon miles of the front line who just refused to fight for that day. And I'm sure the commanders on both sides were probably going apoplectic, wondering how come their people aren't fighting. And to my understanding, thanks to my producer, the last World War I vet was a British soldier, and he died on February 4th of 2012. So yes, all of this video is old, and we no longer have any World War I veterans left alive. But this is to keep their legacy and their memory left alive. So we're going to bring up probably got 2 or 3, maybe 4 World War I veterans in this next clip who are talking about their experiences on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day of 1914. And I gotta open this with a different media player. And here we go.
It was very quiet indeed, but most of the time there was nothing doing at all. There was no use firing unless there was something to fire at. Most of the time there was nothing to fire at. Just saw the German parapet. At night occasionally there was a bit of firing because Verilights were being sent up by both sides more or less all the time, and as they moved, they sort of cast moving shadows of a bush or a depression in the ground that could be easily mistaken for a person moving about. But during the day, there was not, as I say, only just a sniper now and then. If anyone rash enough to show his head above the parapet, 10 chances to 1 to get a sniper's bullet somewhere near him if it didn't get him. But apart from that, it was quite quiet.
And of course, when you get rain on fields and farm tracks and a lot of people walking up and down, obviously it gets pretty muddy. And it was very much like that, getting up to the trenches before one ever got into them. One was halfway up to one's knees probably and struggling along with a pack and a rifle and a blanket and goodness knows what. That was a big ordeal. And when you got into the trenches themselves, we were literally just in a sort of ditch.
You know, as soon as it got daylight, we'd have stand to, and then everybody will be on the lookout in case there's a morning attack. And then, of course, afterwards, it was all settled down. You'd have your rations. Your rations would be brought to a communication trench, and the water carriers would bring you some water if you were lucky. And the normal things, a company officer would come along the lines from other A, B or C, D company and inspect you. And then you'd start the normal duties on sentry go, take it on in turns, 2 on, 4 off, 2 on, hours on, 4 hours off, that sort of thing.
Well, the Germans were about, I think, 300 yards away. We really didn't know anything about them. We just thought, well, poor so-and-sos are in the same kind of muck as we are, and we hated their guts. When they killed any of our friends, we really did dislike them intensely, but otherwise we sort of joked about them, and I think they joked about us.
We were so close, we threw tins over to them and they threw things back. Bully beef and jam and biscuits. It wasn't done regularly, it was just an occasional sort of thing, naturally. We could hear the Germans talking at night, singing and everything. So they used to shout across, Englander, Englander, you know. And we say, good old Jerry and things like that.
We were very much against the German government and the policy of the German government, and the Kaiser particularly. But the individual Germans, well, we thought they were just doing their job in the same way as we were. Although, of course, if it had been an attack, we'd have shot them all right, the same as they'd have shot us. I mean, it was sort of being shot was sort of occupational hazard, and it applied to both sides, and that's the way we sort of looked at it. As a matter of fact, we expected to be out of the trenches for Christmas, and we had made arrangements with different estaminets and places to fix up a Christmas dinner there, for them to provide a chicken or something of the sort, and we'd provide all the things from our parcels, Christmas puddings and mince pies and so forth. But then on December the 23rd, a day before Christmas Eve, we suddenly found that each LRB company, each of the 4 companies, had then been firmly attached to one of the 4 regular battalions. We were, our company, number 2 company, or B company, were attached to the Somerset Light Infantry, and we were also informed that we were to relieve them that evening, on the 23rd in the evening. So we thought, well, bang goes our Christmas. We were rather fed up about that. The next morning, Christmas Eve, was a bright, beautiful, bright winter's day, cold, but very sunny and bright and quite a pleasant day. The only thing which all marred it was during breakfast time, a chap in the next bay to us was a very popular young singer in the company. He was shot through the head by a sniper.
It was a Christmas card, Christmas Eve. There was a white, beautiful moonlight, frost on the ground, almost white everywhere. And round about, I think about 7 or 8 in the evening, we heard this singing, a lot of commotion, and we saw some lights. I don't know what they were, some lights. And later, we heard them singing, Still a Silent Night. Still a Night, Silent Night. I shall never forget it. It's one of the highlights of my life, absolutely, to see them. I thought, what a beautiful tune.
I was standing there on duty, and gazing across, looking across towards the German parapet, and nothing much going on, but I thought, well, a very different Christmas this is going to be from any I've spent up till now. I thought about this time at home we should have finished putting up all the greenery and holly and stuff. And my father would have been just finished making his rum punch, which he always did at Christmas. Anyway, I thought, my word, I could just do with a swig of that rum punch now, and feeling pretty miserable altogether. Then all of a sudden, lights appeared all along the German trench. And I thought, well, this is a funny thing. Then the Germans started singing, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. And I woke up, but all the other sentries did the same thing. We all woke up the other people to come along and see this. What on earth's going on? They finished their carol, we applauded them, and then we thought we must retaliate in some way. So we replied with the First Noel, and when we finished that, they all began clapping, and then they struck up another favourite carol of theirs, O Tannenbaum, which is the same tune as the Red Flag. And so we went on. First the Germans singing one of their carols, then we'd sing another of ours, until then we started up Come All Ye Faithful, and the Germans immediately joined in, singing the same thing to the Latin words of Adeste Fideles. And well, I thought this was rather an extraordinary thing, really, to think of the two nations both singing the same carol in the middle of a war.
They sang something and we applauded, and then we sang something back. And they applauded. I think they were perhaps a bit better at it than we were. They're very fond of male voice choirs, aren't they, the Germans? And they would sing things like Stille Nacht and all that, and sing them really rather beautifully. It was rather foggy, actually, at first that morning, but when the fog cleared, we began to climb out the trench and wave, and then quickly jump in again in case they shot at us. But nobody did shoot, and eventually several people got out, and some of us went forward beyond our barbed wire. Anyway, eventually a couple of chaps met in no man's land and shook hands and turned round and waved, and we all cheered, and then we flocked out like a football crowd, sort of, running as fast as we could. It was very broken ground, and people fell into shell holes and things, but still we all got into the middle eventually, and we began to shake hands, and then we began to swap things like cigarettes and cigars and chocolate and cognac, and we gave them a bit of rum and so on, and everything got very friendly and happy. And we stayed out there the whole of the day.
The no man's land was an extraordinary sight. It was full of parties of Germans and British all meeting each other and talking and laughing and exchanging souvenirs, exchanging buttons and cap badges and so forth. Well, I was walking along and a chap came up to me and he actually greeted me with the words, "What's your cock, how's London?" Well, I said, "Good Lord, you speak English?" Well, he said, "Well, I am English." "No," I said, "you speak like a Londoner." He said, "Well, I'm a Londoner." I said, "Well, what the hell are you doing in the German army?" He said, "Well, I'm a German Londoner." And apparently I think he'd been born in Germany, but he'd gone to England immediately afterwards with his parents, and they had a small business in the East End of London somewhere. And he'd been brought up in England and gone to school in England and everything.
It was all quiet, no firing, and no guns, artillery. And we had rumours passed along the line that there was a meeting with the Germans and British, but we didn't think any more of it. Until later, we saw the Germans coming out their trenches near us, almost opposite. And we, all curious, did the same thing. We came out of our trenches and we walked towards these Germans. And of course, not many of them spoke English. We did find one, a young waiter. He told us he'd worked at De Kaiser's Royal Hotel, Blackfriars in London. He had a wife and 2 children, and he said he didn't want the war at all. And I think, if that sort of thing had gone on more, we may have seen the end of fighting, the end of the war.
How it ever happened, of course, I don't know that anybody can explain it. Did just happen. Nobody said definitely we will all have a truce right along the line, and there will be no firing. Nobody said that. It just occurred. And but it is all, it made us, you see, I was only a very irresponsible young private soldier then, with no responsibilities at all, and it just made us all roar with laughter because we thought of all the generals and people probably going purple in the face, and there's nothing they could do. And anyway, it turned out all right. The Germans were in the same position, obviously. And the only final result of it was that, and we were quite happy about it, was that we had taken out the front line, and it was a beastly bit of front line, about knee-deep in water, where I was living. So we were pulled out of the front line that night, and we said, well, jolly good, a very fine result of a truce.
Darling dear, as I cannot be with you, all the next best thing is to write to you, for so I get closer. We have had a seasonable weather day, which means sharp frost and fog and never a smitch of sun. I went to church with 2 of my battalions in an enormous factory room, and after lunch took down to the North Staffords in my old tender at Rue du Bois Mother's gifts of toffee, sweets, cigarettes, pencils, handkerchiefs and writing paper. There I found an outstanding state of affairs. This morning a German shouted out that they wanted a day's truce, and would one come out if he did. So, very cautiously, one of our men lifted himself above the parapet and saw a German doing the same. Both got out, then more, and finally all day long in that particular place they have been walking about together all day, giving each other cigars and singing songs. Officers as well as men were out, and the German colonel himself was talking to one of our captains. My informant, one of the men, said he had had a fine day and had smoked a cigar with the best shot in the German army, then not more than 18. They say he's killed more of our men than any other 12 together, but I know now where he shoots from, so I hope we down him tomorrow. I hope devoutly they will. Next door, the 2 battalions opposite each other were shooting away all day, and so, well, I hear it was further north. 1st Royal Battalion playing football with the Germans, opposite them, next reports shooting each other. I was invited to go and see the Germans myself, but refrained, as I thought they might not be able to resist a general.
I have a letter here that I wrote on Boxing Day, 1914. My dear father, mother and girls, just a line to let you know that we've had quite a merry Christmas, and indeed a very novel one. Would you believe it? By mutual consent, our battalion and the Germans opposite had a little armistice. We didn't fire a shot all day. It was really funny to see the hated antagonists standing in groups, laughing and talking and shaking hands. Of course, we didn't talk about who was going to win or anything touchy like that. It was a beautiful day. The ground was white with frost. Some of them were trying to arrange a football match, but it didn't come off. Talk about peace and goodwill, I never saw a friendlier sight. We tried to explain to each other that we bore no malice.
The Blank Regiment actually had a football match with the Saxons, who beat them 3-2. After lunch, we sent a cyclist back to find a football. On his return, we played them a match, winning easily by 4-1.
Christmas 1915, we were holding the line up in Flanders still. Previously we'd been on lines of communication all the summer. We were up in Flanders again, in the St. Elwar district. But we weren't actually, our battalion wasn't actually in the trenches over Christmas. We were in Poppering, in billets. But we'd had an order just before Christmas that under no conditions would there be any fraternising with the enemy this Christmas. It was quite a definite order. And the same thing applied every Christmas afterwards. 1916, 1917, I wasn't there because I'd been wounded, but I think it was all through every year. They still repeated this order: no fraternization, and there never was.
Well, that was the Christmas Truce of 1914. You know, the war probably would have been over at that time if it would have just been left up to the soldiers who decided not to fight that day. But the commanders and the politicians, they wanted to continue to fight, and that's what they did. And in the entirety of World War I was able to pull the statistics that there were 65,038,810 total participants, 9,750,103 combat deaths. That's, deaths, including disease. Florence Green was the British citizen who was the last World War I veteran, served with the Allied Armed Forces and died on 4th of February of 2012 at age 110. The last combat veteran was Claude Scholes, a British Royal Navy veteran, who died on May 5th of 2011 at the age of 110. The last soldier who was in the trenches, in the trench warfare during World War I, was Harry Patch from the British Army, who died on July 25th, 2009 at age 111. And then the last of the Axis powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, was Franz Kunstler, who served for Austria-Hungary and died on May 27th, 2008 at age 107. So if you would have looked at what was happening at that time, at least between the British and the Germans, there was still a lot of chivalry involved and protocols, and even the French were upholding that. Really what helped fasten an end to World War I was the American involvement, because General John Blackjack Pershing had decided that he did not want to run the same type of trench warfare campaign that had stymied the British and the French for so long, and decided to fight the Germans out in the open. And the Battle of Belleau Wood was one of the most instrumental battles that facilitated the end of World War I, but that battle didn't occur until 1917. So we still had fighting in the trenches for the last couple of years. But now let's take a look at what happened to commemorate this event of this Christmas truce, this famous story. I first heard about it in high school, but then I read a book by Stanley Weintraub, and he focused specifically on the Christmas truce. And now, as we hit that 100th year anniversary, here's how it was commemorated.
Commemorative Christmas truce football games have been common this year. It is the centennial of the original game, played, as the story goes, during the dark times of World War I, in the trenches in Belgium, where Britain and Germany faced each other in 1914. But few of the games this year can claim to be reenacted in a current war zone. Eyewitness accounts from World War I veterans state that the singing of Silent Night from both sides of the front lines inspired the warring British and German soldiers to make friendly gestures to one another and lay down their arms in honor of Christmas.
That day 100 years ago on Christmas Day was an extraordinary moment, and in the absolute darkness of conflict you had soldiers putting down their weapons, soldiers who have to fight these conflicts, so they didn't start them, putting down their weapons and coming together and celebrating humanity. And they exchanged photographs of families, they talked about families, they exchanged gifts, and they played a game of football, and they sang carols. And that's just wonderful. And then it was all ended by the artillery firing. We don't know which side fired the artillery. I suspect it was probably the British. Soldiers having too much fun.
British and German forces are currently deployed in Afghanistan and thus able to reenact the match, along with having to pause the game for the occasional helicopter landing. Wartime realism was also achieved by both teams wearing their military uniforms and boots for the first half. And while the first Christmas football game symbolized a moment of peace and harmony, today's participants couldn't help but think of the more contemporary feud between German and British football.
Germany versus England is the football game. It is a very serious game. It has been battled over in numerous World Cups, Euro Cups, and it is always a big event when England plays Germany. The history of this game is phenomenal, and a couple of World Cups, they seem to do better than us. Well, hopefully we'll claw back a bit of national pride.
The British did win the game 3-0. But the fun and larger historical significance of the event overshadowed national partisanship.
It's the two nations that 100 years ago met on the battlefield in Belgium and played football between the trenches. And those two nations now standing shoulder by shoulder, 13 years together here in Afghanistan, playing football together is a great signal. I think it makes a point of, to make enduring peace work, you have to celebrate your similarities rather than what divides you. And I think, if anything, that's a message for the Afghans. Stick with it. And there is real hope here, I hope.
Jeff Holden with Samim Zalmi for NATO Channel.
Through Christmas spirit, the sounds of war were silenced, and soldiers from opposing sides laid down their weapons. They exchanged photographs, they exchanged gifts, and in one of the most remarkable moments in our history, they were united in common interest, in football.
Je trouve particulièrement émouvant.
I find it especially moving to imagine these young men 100 years ago finding a common language in football to express their comradeship.
Exprimer leur fraternité.
So, 100 years ago, it was Silent Night, which was the Christmas carol that brought both warring factions together. Now, Silent Night was a song written by Franz Gruber, and I believe it was around 1808. And what ended up happening was he was a musician in a church in Germany, and mice had chewed through the chords for the organ, and so there was absolutely no way that the organ music could be heard in the church, and so Franz Gruber wrote the song Silent Night on guitar. In fact, a lot of, we hear this in America today as a very popular Christmas song, and it wasn't really until after the World War I truce when that really increased its popularity on this side of the ocean. But that reminds me of a Christmas Eve that I experienced in 2003 when I was stationed at Kirkuk Air Base, Iraq. I had mentioned last week how it was a very, very long period of time when we were dealing with the capture of Saddam Hussein. We had the USO tour. We were still under rocket attacks. But on this particular night, on Christmas Eve, I remember going to breakfast in the dining hall, and I ran into a buddy of mine, Mike Yashinsky. And we sat down and we discussed the Minnesota Wild and Colorado Avalanche. He was from Monument, Colorado, and one of the things I said to him is, I said, Ski, when we get out of this place, I want you to come and visit me in Minnesota. And I'll treat you to a Colorado Avalanche, Minnesota Wild game. And he looked at me and he says, "You do that for me?" I said, "I don't know of any other hockey fans in this particular expletive deletive." And he patted me on the shoulder and he goes, "Williams, you're all right." That particular night, though, he was being a good sergeant, and he had let his younger troops take care of an emergency that happened on the base. And the communication line went out at the medical aid station. And so then he said to his younger troops, "Go and enjoy the Christmas party, I got this one." Something happened to the transformer box, and my friend Mike was electrocuted. High voltage electricity went through his body, which was thrown back about 30 feet, and he died instantly. So I just wanted to show you now just a couple of photos of Mike Yashinsky. Really great guy, really dedicated sergeant. And go ahead and pull it up. And he had passed away 11 years ago this past Christmas Eve. For him, the Christmas truce had become permanent. He never had to deal with any pain or any war after that. This is another artist's rendering of, this is actually shot at the memorial service that we had for him. That was one of his fellow 173rd Airborne Brigade members who had done this in his honor. And then here's his grave in Monument, Colorado. So that was how I remembered Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve in wartime. It's not a good experience, but I'll tell you, everyone who serves under arms knows that there's a price to pay, and that price is sometimes your life. And unfortunately, Mike's was cut short. He was only 28 years old. And looking now at today's Christmas, I had the opportunity of going out and watching the film Unbroken. So yes, another war film, and it was directed by Angelina Jolie. And I'll tell you, this is absolutely a fabulous film, very inspirational. And so I guess for our final segment, we're going to leave you with a video about the life of Louis Zamperini, and I encourage you to all go out and see this film.
Finally, after all these years, I'm here at the Billy Graham Library. I'm very grateful to be here today. I've thought about it, I've read about it, I've seen pictures about it. It's a landmark, there's no question about it.
We have World War II veteran and prisoner of war, Louis Zamperini here, doing a book signing for his new book, Unbroken, by Laura Hillenbrand.
The book, because of Laura's fame and the fame of Seabiscuit and her style of writing, the book has reached an entirely different group of people.
The book Unbroken brought his experience to life, and it was very moving for me to read it.
It's an incredible story of perseverance and redemption and just faith.
The book has the gospel in it, and when people read the book, then I know that they've heard the gospel. That's a responsibility that we have as Christians to either verbally present the gospel or in the written word. The book is having a great ministry, which is thrilling. I get around quite a bit, but the book gets around more than I do, so thank God for that.
Any World War II veterans are encouraged to cut to the front of the line.
I read the book and I thought it was terrific. I've never known that people could survive that long, 44 days in the water like that.
Thank you. God bless you.
What happened to him was way beyond what the human body and the human spirit can take. Obviously not in his case.
On the raft, we turn to God. In prison, we turn to God. Get me home alive and I'll seek you and serve you. We come home alive and I turn my back on the promises until I was reminded by the Billy Graham message that afternoon and went forward and made a confession of my faith in Christ. Oh, wow. Never remember that time.
He received Christ after hearing Billy Graham preach so very profoundly and strongly.
And it's a thrill to have you here today.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. It is nostalgic. Memories of the greatest day of my life when I came to Christ. That's something you can't forget it. Thank God I'm here, and thank God for Billy Graham. He's indelible in my heart and mind.
story could have been 4 different movies, easily 4 different movies. So talk about, I guess, the script writing process and your vision for it, and how you fought to get it.
I did. I fought so hard. I went into these open stories that have no directors. The open directing assignments, and I had a general with Universal, and I just saw these 4 little sentences about Louis Zamperini, who he was, and I thought just the strength of the human spirit and something about him, but I never assumed I would get the job or get close to it, but I wanted to talk to them about it. Donna, I read some of the early drafts, and then I read Laura's book, and when I read Laura's book, I realized it wasn't about just the events and the great adventure that, of course, it was, and it wasn't just about heroics. It was so inspirational, and I felt so moved by it, and I wanted to know what it was to come through this journey. I wanted to understand. I wanted to learn from him, and what would it be like to have years of my life dedicated to this man and learning about him and knowing him, and how fortunate I would be, and how much better, what would that do to me, my family, and so I started to fight for it, and it took me a few months to convince them that I could do it, and then I got to know Louis, and he was just such an extraordinary man, and so the construction of how to put the script together was just a lot of trying to figure out what his life was and what it meant, and so what we would include and exclude was very, very difficult, because you want to put everything in. But the Coen brothers were wonderful in saying, if you literally make this book word for word and try to do everything in this, you will make a bad movie. So just understand that when people put the book down, they have a certain feeling, and your job is to make sure they have that feeling when the movie ends. If you look at the themes of his life, there's the endurance of the athlete, there's the little boy that didn't know if he was worth anything, and the relationship with his brother and coming to terms with the sense of self and will, and there's his faith. And we wanted, and so faith was to be in this film, and it was to be in this film not just as a final chapter, but to make sure it was in the film from the beginning of the film and all through the film, and so we instead of thinking, well, let's do 10 minutes at the end and try to sum up post-traumatic stress disorder and finding God, let's make sure that that is present and bring it into the camp, and make sure that that message is strong. So it was very important to us, and it was also important to Louis that it was done in a way that it was also for all faiths and people who are not people of faith, that the message would reach as many people as possible in that way.
And finding Jack, what were you looking for in casting that, in casting these 2 main roles here?
Trouble. I felt it was very important that Louis be young, be really young. These were young men at war, and so that was important. It had to be a man that felt like you'd believe and you could watch him get through this experience, so it had to be a young man of strength and fight and fire, a real man's man. And it also had to be a man that was extremely, had a heart and a soul and was connected to family and could reach that emotional depth. So it was and could run, and it was a very tall order. Imagine if I'm the greatest actor and you just couldn't run. So it was really, and I think we weren't sure if we'd find the perfect person or somehow, and it was quite clear when I saw his audition. I've seen his work in Startup, and I think his performance speaks for itself, and for Miyavi, it was very important that Watanabe's character was not a stereotype of a Japanese prison guard. It was accurate to how he really was in history. He was very intelligent, very well educated, and very striking man, who was very conflicted, and so it was very important to me that we had a man of strength and presence, and a good man, because I think you cast somebody to play somebody dark, and you must cast somebody who in fact doesn't like being violent and is full of goodness, and he's a really wonderful man and dad, and much more balanced than the character he plays. We'd all spent time personally with Louis, and when you meet a real man, and when you meet other people who have been in war or certainly been prisoners of war, you're very aware that you want to present a film that's we're actually PG-13, you know, to try to keep it as much that you think you saw, but make sure some things are off camera, some things we watch the blood, we're very careful about everything. But you have to pay respect to what these men actually went through, and you have to hit a certain level to show this is war, and this is how horrible these experiences were. So I think there was no real question. We understood that it was a part of history, and any time there were difficult moments, we would all kind of sit together and think, can you imagine what it was really like? Can you imagine what it was like not to be able to go home like we're going home tonight, or be able to hug? I remember after the 220-man punch, you two hugged immediately. After the, you know, there was such a connection of like, there was so much what that is to be abused in that way, what it is to be so aggressive. It's not a nice thing to revisit, but it's history, and so it, you know, I think it was difficult, but it was necessary.
However dark the night, however dim our hopes.
Inbound 4 o'clock low.
The light will always follow darkness.
Keep going the way you're going, you end up as a bum on the street. You train. You fight harder than those other guys, and you win. If you can take it, you can make it. You can do this, Lou. You just gotta believe you can. Pop does. Ma does. I do. Louis, a moment of pain is worth a lifetime of glory.
We're gonna die out here.
We're not dying!
I got good news and bad news.
Who is the Olympic athlete? Don't look at me.
Hello, mother, father. This is your Louis talking. I am now interned in a Tokyo prisoner of war camp. I can't say this. What it says about America, it's not true.
This man must be taught respect. Each prisoner will teach him this lesson.
I used to think that I could do anything, that I was better than I am. Who says you're not?
If you get me through this, I swear I'll dedicate my whole life to you.
If I can take it, I can make it.
Stay down. If he drops it, shoot him. Come on.
After going through all of that, Louis Zamperini still had the heart to forgive his captors. And, you know, he's just a remarkable man. Louis Zamperini passed away in this past July at the age of 97. And he, you know, I guess if that's the moral of the entire episode today, is forgiveness, truce, moving on, reconciliation. So I highly recommend that you go out and see Unbroken. So that's our last show of the year. So for our producer, Dallas Pearson, our young assistant intern producer, Andrew Hartsock, and me, your host, Jeff Williams, Happy New Year. We'll see you next week.